Hello and welcome. Dr. Chaitra Redkar is a political scientist with experience in academics for over 25 years. Currently, she is Associate Professor and HOD of Humanities and Social Sciences at the prestigious ISER Institute in Pune. Prior to that, she taught political science at SNDT Women's University, Mumbai. Her research focuses on the intellectual history of modern India, especially how Indian thinkers shaped the ideas about community, nationhood, state, civil society, development, and justice. She has a couple of interesting publications to her credit, including Gandhian Engagement with Capital, Perspectives of J.C. Kumar by Sage Publication, साने गुरुजी व्यक्ती आणि विचार by Sadhana Prakashan. She has worked with NCERT and Bal Bharti in their textbook development programs and have co-authored several school textbooks on Indian Constitution. Apart from her impressive academic record, what strikes me the most about Dr. Redkar is her commitment to bringing about the society based on the constitutional values of liberty, equality, and fraternity, and her active engagement with movements and efforts towards realizing that goal. So I think precisely for this reason, we couldn't have had a better person than her to talk on today's occasion. So I want you all to welcome Dr. Redkar with a big round of applause. Thank you.
So the theme that I have selected for today's discussion is Constitution and the idea of India. Now, all of you are studying Constitution, you have studied constitutions. I'm not here to give you information about the Constitution, but I would rather try to provide a perspective to look at Indian Constitution. So something that you already know, I'll try to avoid and repeat. But certainly there is a particular way I look at Indian Constitution which I would like to share with you. This is also necessary that though all the students of politics or those who study social issues seriously and honestly may not have this kind of dilemma or this kind of confusion in their mind. If you read the Constitution very seriously, but despite studying it very seriously and honestly, there's so much that is going on with regard to the Constitution on social media and other kind of debates that are taking place in the public discourse, that there certainly are a couple of doubts about the Constitution. These are manufactured doubts, but nevertheless, they exist. And also, one of the reasons that they exist and they are sustained is because there is some kind of a lobby, you would say, or certain kind of scholarship, quote unquote, question mark in the bracket, but they have been very consistently putting forth certain arguments regarding the originality of Indian Constitution. And then there are various debates that go on with regard to presidential versus parliamentary, whether presidential system would have been better for us, or whether the federalism that we actually have is a right choice or it could have been something different. Then the ongoing debate about North versus South, Hindi as national language, the linguistic reorganization of states. So everything that India stands for, or India has been standing for last 75 plus years, there is some kind of doubt, there is some kind of debate that has been generated, and even when you study constitution seriously, we at times feel confused about the ethos of the constitution, or the way the constitution has been developed and the way it is practiced. Also, the practice of last 75 plus years also at times creates doubts, and those doubts are created not by any one particular political party, but whoever was in power, did they pay just a lip service to the philosophy of the constitution? And if everybody has done that, can we consider constitution really a very robust document? Is a kind of suspicion that has been planted in the minds of people. And I must share that this is not something that has happened for the first time, or is happening only in recent times, because this is something which keeps coming up for public debate after some gap repeatedly, but it keeps coming. And if you just look at the older literature, there also you will find that there are people who have consistently written about it. And there has also been another set of scholars who have very consistently answered the doubts and the questions which were raised in such public debates. So without going very, very far in history, even from my own personal memory, I can share with you possibly the years when all of you were born or may not have born that point of time. But the last one from my own personal memory that I can recollect was sometime around 1997, when Arun Shourie had written this book, Worshipping False God, and where the originality of Indian Constitution was questioned. And in a very academic and intellectual way, Professor Y.D. Phadke wrote a book refuting every single allegation that Shourie had put against Dr. Ambedkar and Indian Constitution. Because the title itself was mischievous and deceptive, worshipping false gods, as you are unnecessarily worshipping Dr. Ambedkar was the baseline, because the argument that he had put up in that particular book is that Indian Constitution is not an original document. And he had selectively quoted many things and had tried to establish that how it's, in a way, the bad word is stolen from many other constitutions. And that is the argument, even when refuted by a scholar like Y.D. Phadke, with some kind of whispering campaign. And if you just check YouTube, you will find that claimed, self-proclaimed kind of scholarly videos are launched, even in recent times, maybe even if you just review for last 1 year, whatever year or year and a half you check, you will find that there have been such videos that have been posted and which do argue that there is nothing original in Indian Constitution. Now here, I'm not here to defend the Constitution, because I'm a scholar, I'm a researcher. So if I make some argument, I make it impassionately. Something that I see, and that's why I support. It's not otherwise, that I want to support something and that's why I look for supportive evidence. The outcome, the end result of this process is certainly that I do admire Indian Constitution, and I will never shy away from saying this, that it's a very, very original document. And when we say original document, there is something which I would like to share with you, and that is what I'm calling as building a perspective about Indian Constitution. Now, let's go back in history and ask ourselves a very basic question, that what is the purpose of constitution? Why constitutions are made? And I'm not talking only about the Indian constitution. I'm asking you a generic kind of question, that why constitution was made. Now, we do get some references to some kind of a rule book which always existed in history, may not be a very universal kind of idea, may not have existed across the countries, but it was always experimented in history. Somebody somewhere would have some kind of a rule book, which is more or less like a constitution, something that we now call as a constitution. But the very essence of constitution as it evolved has to be connected with the advent of modernity in Europe. And the very idea of political as a separate autonomous entity which evolves around modernity right from 14th century onwards in Europe particularly. You can take it back even to Magna Carta, 1215. But generally the kind of changes which were taking place in Europe right from 14th century were a very significant idea that came forward is what is Caesar unto Caesar, what is God unto God. Segregation of church and the state, and the segregation of state itself is an idea which shapes political the way we understand it today. Of course, we have expanded the meaning even further, but this kind of meaning of political originates somewhere along with modernity, along with the evolution of a modern state. And when the state is being defined, the state as a political entity is getting consolidated, it becomes necessary that all the other entities, all the stakeholders, all the players in the society, their role needs to be defined. And who were the players that particular point of time in history? So you will find there are feudal lords who were taking care of local level administration, collecting taxes, protecting the masses from pirates. So basic function of the state is being performed by them. There were of course kings, and there were also the religious head, the church and the priests were also there. So these are the players, they are bargaining with each other, they are negotiating with each other, they are fighting with each other. And in the presence of these very powerful entities, there are humans who are emerging, who are getting transformed into what we now call as individuals, as political animals. So on the one hand, we want some kind of certainty as individuals, we want some kind of certainty, we want protection, we want safety, security, so that we will be able to live a good life, a quality life. We will be able to prosper and do our businesses, respective businesses, whether it's farming, agriculture, or trade, or any other thing, whatever we are doing. We want safety, security, but we don't want to trade off our freedom, our individuality, for the sake of that security and that kind of a protection which the state is providing us or is promising to provide us. And how both the things could be ensured, how a safe kind of collective life, very organized kind of collective life, and individual rights, how both the things could be achieved at one and the same time. The idea which came up was that of constitutionalism. When you define the powers and functions of various entities, when you define the rights of individuals, you provide some kind of a definite framework to organize your collective life, which would provide security, which would provide a peaceful collective life, and at the same time will ensure rights to individuals. So this idea evolves with the kind of changes which the European societies witnessed over centuries. And then we get to see that constitutions are being written, but the very philosophy of constitutionalism is a product of this churning. And of course, in the later phases, when the international system is getting more organized, constitution becomes one of the source of legitimacy. So if you want some kind of recognition at international level as an autonomous, independent, sovereign nation state, constitution is seen as one of the essential factor which will ensure that you are a state, you have set up a rule book and have created some kind of protection for the rights of the citizens of your country. And that's how constitution becomes a very crucial aspect of our modern life and modern democracies. Now, when I'm saying certain things about the Indian constitution, we need to remember that before Indian constitution was written, when the very process of writing Indian constitution started, this kind of experimentation with the idea of constitution, constitutionalism had already taken place for more than 3 centuries. Various kinds of constitutions were written, rewritten, rejected, implemented, newer ideas were coming up. And that is the reason there is one very important speech that Dr. Ambedkar gave before the Constituent Assembly, where he says that at this stage in history, what original do you expect? Now, this is not a lame excuse. This is not a justification. The point here is that when the societies across the world have experimented with organizing their collective life in different ways, they have failed and have succeeded. There is something which you can learn from their experiments. Then at such a stage, are we not supposed to learn from their experiences? Are we not, shall we not borrow something from their experiences? But when we do that, it's not getting inspired, or I'm using that word very sarcastically. In the sense, nowadays we see many songs which are actually copied from songs of from some different cultural context, but without giving credit, they say that we were inspired by them. So your Dhurandhar Nato Karwa Ki Talash Hai is actually was composed by Roshan, but interesting part is that song also, even before Sangeetkar Roshan is Hrithik Roshan's Dadaji. So even before he composed that song, sometime in 50s, that song was actually composed by a person who was actually Pakistani, who was Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan's father. So it was actually a traditional Sufi Qawwali, which was taken from him by Roshan, and now from Roshan again it's used in Dhurandhar. So I'm not talking about that kind of inspiration when I'm talking about Indian Constitution. I'm talking of experimentation in purely scientific manner. And when I'm saying scientific manner, if now I teach in a science institute, ISER. So suppose somebody in ISER says that because the theory of gravitation was first discovered or developed by Newton, and Newton was not Indian, we want to be original. So we will start with the theory of gravitation. First we'll invent it, after that it is a laughable kind of a proposition, right? So if in scientific way somebody has experimented and have come up with some results, we need to build from there. We need to go ahead from that point, and that's exactly what was done in Indian Constitution. So if you look at the 10 big volumes which now are clubbed together into 5 volumes of Constituent Assembly debates, every single word in the Constitution was discussed. It's like picking up various things in your cart from various experiences, but that picking up is not mindless. That picking up was not random. It was very thoroughly discussed, debated, and Dr. Ambedkar answers each single question that was asked in the Constituent Assembly, that why you are using a particular word. So even if somebody is using the word that, and Dr. Ambedkar believes that that is not the correct word, this needs to be the correct word, that explanation also you will find in the Constitution. So as simple as that and this, which means it was thought thoroughly. Our reality was taken into consideration. Our specific issues were taken into consideration. Our cultural and historical context was taken into consideration. And then Indian Constitution was written. So my humble submission is, writing of Indian Constitution was the very original experiment in developing Indian knowledge system. Indian knowledge system is not always invoking your ancient past. Something that has Indianness in it, something that has Indian ethos in it. And that Indian ethos was conserved by Indian Constitution. When I'm making that statement, I'm making it very responsibly, because if you look at Indian Constitution, and the title of my presentation today, that the idea of India and Indian Constitution, we need to remember that it's not a construct. It's not a construct of certain people who believed in composite culture. Now, the word composite culture is objectionable for many people. The very word Ganga Jamni Tehzeeb is not acceptable to some people, because they want to assert that it's essentially Hindu and not multicultural, multi-religious. But the very idea of India, even if you want to replace it with the word Hindu, because even that kind of exercises have also taken place over the years, and even before 2014, sometime in 70s, 80s also, these kinds of books were written where India and Hindu are, these words are Bharatiyatva, Hindutva hits Bharatiyatva was kind of the line which was floated and was circulated very widely. So I would not want to use that word, but still, if you want to use that word, there is very, very fantastic essay. I'm not able to recollect the author, but I very clearly remember the title of that article, that when was Hinduism? Now, that particular article is very, very significant, because historically what existed on this land was the existence of diversity. If you believe that Hinduism is a monolithic kind of a religion, it never was. And now people might have taken up a political project to create it that particular way. But there are Shaivas, there are Shaktas, there are Vaishnavas, and their belief system, their practices are very, very different. So if the Vaishnavas would practice vegetarianism, the Shaktas would offer a non-veg to the deity as prasad, as bhog. And both claim themselves to be Hindus. There is Vedic practices, there are non-Vedic practices. There are local community level practices. And everybody, even if you go to the temple every day or you don't go to the temple, you fast or you don't fast, you still can claim to be a Hindu. So if such a diversity was the beauty of Hinduism, the ethos, the originality of this land, what is it that you are trying to do when you define Hinduism in a very narrow way? You are actually doing harm to that beauty of Hinduism, that glory of Hinduism, which encompassed so many things inside its existence. And it could be contradictory. It was detrimental to the interest of certain communities, but that's the idea. That there were certain practices which were inhuman, but then in 19th century there were reformers who tried to do away with those practices. And for doing that, they didn't want to do away with the religion as well. But they neither tried to use religion as a political identity. So if you look at the intellectual history of India, something that happened in the 19th century, something that was happening prior to the coming of British, something that was happening to even earlier centuries when the even I would say the Prophet of Islam had not propagated the religion. So 6th century BC also, not BC, 6th century AD also, if you look at it, this kind of cultural exchange is taking place. So what exists as Indianness, as Bharatiyatva, is basically absence of homogeneous, monolithic kind of an identity. This acceptance of diversity. And when I say diversity, you can also look at the way these cultural exchanges took place in this particular land. After the coming of Islam, and again we need to remember that Islam didn't come in India in 11th century. It came in India even before that. The southern states, the South India, where the trade through sea route was always taking place with Arabia. Even during Buddhist period, we have references of trade happening. Islam came in the south coast even when the Prophet of Islam was very much there in Arabia. So if you read what the Zamorin was told, that Zamorin is one of the Kerala king. So he had a dream that there is some kind of a prophet who is coming with a message. And the next day, the Arab traders come and the Arab traders tell him about the Prophet of Islam there in Medina. And he feels that he's the one who he saw in dreams, and he just sails to go to Arabistan. So that happened in 6th century. So point here is that this kind of cultural exchange was taking place on this land throughout the history, throughout the time, whether it was with the religions that were not born on this land or the philosophical and religious practices that emerged in this land. There was always this kind of a exchange which was taking place, and that is India. That is the true ethos of India. When we want to redefine ourselves with a particular very stereotypical idea of religion, though we do say that dharma is very different than religion, but on the other hand, the political agenda is that we should have one book, one God, one language, one nation, one religion. So if that's how we are trying to remodel ourselves, reshape ourselves, and claiming it as Indian, that is not Indian. That is actually moving away from the true spirit of Indianness. What the Constitution of India, in fact, tried to do is to protect that Indian ethos. So if you look at the entire document, the Indian Constitution, and I will take 2-3 different examples. More can be spoken about this idea when you ask me questions. But let's take 2-3 examples from the Constitution and see how this diversity, how this difference was approached by the Indian Constitution. The very first and the foremost idea is that of federalism. In case of federalism, first very important thing that we need to remember is that federalism is not just about dual system of government. Rather, if you believe that federalism is having governments at 2 levels, you are supporting a very narrow definition of federalism. And this narrow definition of federalism is something which was practiced or which was supported by American scholars and couple of scholars in 50s and 60s who were in later times they were criticized for being Eurocentric. Because a scholar like Casey Weir has written extensively on federalism, and he's the one who coins this word quasi-federal. Many of you must have read that word, particularly in basic textbooks on Indian politics. That is the word that we use. That what is the characteristic feature of Indian Constitution? Indian government is quasi-federal. Now, what is quasi-federal? Quasi-federal is we say that federalism with centralizing tendencies, where center is stronger than the federating units. Now, is there any definite model of federalism? Who defined it? It's not that there is some kind of an ideal type of federalism, and because you deviated from that ideal type of federalism, now you don't have the right to claim that you are federal, and that's why we are calling you quasi-federal. That's what happened with Casey Weir's classificatory scheme, that he calls us quasi-federal because for him the ideal type is American model, and if you are not following the American model, then the another model is Swiss model. You are neither following Swiss model, so you are neither confederation, you are not federation. So what you are is you are quasi-federal. What you are missing out in such kind of classification and such kind of branding is the very idea of federalism. Federalism, the basic principle of federalism is power sharing. How do you share power? Do you share it by delegation, or do you share it by defining the role of various entities? In such case, there could be more than one stakeholders. In federalism, necessarily there is more than one stakeholder, but there is no rule that the stakeholders should be only 2. Now we say that yes, the third tier of government, which is local bodies, and then how do we fix that, whether that's decentralization or what is the word that should be used, and there could be much debate about this. But this debate starts when we decide or we accept a definition that in federalism there has to be only two layers. And because you are moving away from that, there is something wrong with you. So for you, then we'll have to find out a new word. Not necessary. If it's about power sharing, you can share power whichever way that suits your society. First, I'm saying society in the sense the social structures, the way society exists. Secondly, that suits you historically. So if Article 370 or Article 371 was included in Indian Constitution, now we have done away with Article 370, but we need to remember that even Article 370 was not a deviation from the federal principle. Why? Here comes the second important feature of Indian Constitution, that we have adopted the idea of differential equality. Equality is not sameness. And for the Western scholarship to realize the idea of differential equality, particularly for the liberal discourse, it took almost 1990s when Will Kimlicka comes up and writes about multiculturalism, and then and even feminists assert for redefining equality, and then comes up the very idea of differential equality. But Indian Constitution accepts the idea of differential equality. And I generally, when talking with young people, I give a very, very simple example from our daily life. No need to go for some highly technical legal examples. A very simple thing is that when you are eating food and your parent is, for instance, making chapatis or bhakris, and if there are two daughters, one daughter says that today I'm hungry like anything and I can eat a bull, and the other daughter says that I'm not feeling that hungry, I will eat only half chapati. Do you expect mother to ensure that both the daughters eat same number of chapatis? Why? Can we say that if she doesn't give same number of chapatis to both the daughters, she doesn't love them equally? No. Equality is not sameness. If I am more hungry, I will eat 3 rotis today. Tomorrow I'll eat half a roti. My sister will eat 3 rotis today, 3 rotis tomorrow, 3 rotis day after tomorrow, because she has that much hunger that day. Don't expect from me that today I ate 3 rotis, I should eat 3 rotis tomorrow. Of course, our mothers get angry with us if we don't eat 3 rotis, because then basi roti kaun khayega? Main nahi har roz khaungi. That's fair enough. That is a different context altogether. What we need to remember is equality is not sameness. As per your need, as per the context, somebody is going to gym, a particular kind of diet is prescribed. That is what the person will eat. Somebody is diabetic, that person will eat differently. You can't say that because there is this difference that exists, there is no equality. At the social level, at the societal level, what we need to remember is that various societies, various communities are shaped by different historical conditions. And the reason could be the social structures, for instance, caste system, could be economic, it could be geographical location, it could be profession, it could be something very different, of course, gender, but something that we haven't thought of could also be there. Very, very simple example I'll take. I assume that most of the people sitting in this class are from Maharashtra or from nearby states at the most. But we haven't gone through the experiences of living in a border state. What the people of Punjab have faced, we haven't faced that in past 75 years. Some riot here and there, some earthquake here and there, some flood here and there, some natural calamity. But man-made disasters which change your life for generations. You must have heard about the stories where people actually had to undergo treatment for their mental health after partition. There is very, very fantastic dialogue. I don't know whether Manto had actually said this, but the movie on Manto which was made, he said कि मैं भिंडी बाजार छोड़ के ग्रैंड रोड ना रहने जाऊं, आप मुझे पाकिस्तान भेज रहे हैं. मतलब आई एम सो फैमिलियर विद द लोकेलिटी ऑफ भिंडी बाजार. मेरे पुरखों की जो ग्रेव्स हैं वो यहाँ पे है. उनको छोड़ के मैं, आप कैसे एक्सपेक्ट कर सकते हो कि मैं दूसरे देश में चला जाऊं? मतलब आई एम कनेक्टेड विद दिस लैंड. सो दिस काइंड ऑफ connection, this kind of cultural context, this kind of cultural, linguistic kind of diversity which existed in this land, the way Constitution acknowledged that differences, and rather than suppressing it, rather than trying to ignore it in the name of nation building, what the Constitution does is it celebrates diversity. You can be who you are and still you can be Indian. There is no need for you to mold or remold yourself into some stereotypical idea of Indianness, and still you can be Indian. I have often done this exercise. In ISER, my class is truly diverse. I have Assamese students, Northeast, various regions from Odisha, there are students, Bengalis, Malayalis, and I ask them to define what it means for you to be a Malayali, and then tell me what it means for you to be an Indian. Tell me what it means for you to be Marathi, and tell me what it means for you to be Indian. There is no conflict between being a Marathi and an Indian. There is no conflict for a Malayali to be Malayali and Indian. At the most, what we feel is we actually more nationalist than others. And that every community believes in this. It's not only the Marathi people who will feel this, but it's every single community we feels कि हम लोग ही ज़्यादा nationalist हैं. But that we can't help. हमको भी लगता है कि we are more nationalist than the others. But there is no conflict between these two identities. And how does that happen? Because the Constitution adopted this idea of differential equality. And because this idea of differential equality, which I said on the structural level, we get to see that in federalism, particularly with the clauses like 370 and 371, which were incorporated. In the terms of fundamental rights, if you look at this idea of differential equality, the very right to equality, of course, with all the subclauses, creates conditions whereby equality could be implemented to accommodate diversity and at the same time do away with inequality. So both responsibilities were there. That every inequality cannot be justified in the name of diversity. Are you getting what I'm saying? You can't say that हमारे घर में तो ऐसे ही होता है, हम तो नहीं अलाउ करते फलाने जाति के लोगों को घर में आने के लिए, नथिंग डूइंग, बिकॉज दिस इज नॉट डाइवर्सिटी, दिस इज inequality. So if you are practicing untouchability in any form, untouchability is abolished, and its practice in any form is punishable under law. Very clear statement. But there could be culturally different practices. There is no need for you to give up eating meat. There is no need for you to start practicing vegetarianism. If you do it by choice, do it. If you don't want to eat vegetables, that too is fine. If you want to eat fish, that's your choice. If you want to wear certain kind of clothing, that's your choice. That is something which the Constitution has ensured. Not just that, if you look at the rights of linguistic minorities, that has been protected, which gives rights to establish various linguistic organizations even while you are living outside your state. So for instance, Hyderabad Marathi Sahitya Sammelan, which takes place, or Sahitya Sangha that they, Sahitya Parishad, not Sangha, Sahitya Parishad that they have, or Indore Marathi Sahitya Parishad. What gives them the right to form this while staying in a Telugu state or a Hindi speaking state is the idea of differential equality. It is the right of culturally different people. Then also religious minorities get the right to practice their religion, practice their culture, to establish educational or cultural institutes, because it's celebration of diversity. It's not harming you. Culturally, you can practice whatever you want as long as it is not upsetting the idea of justice and equality. So those kinds of practices are accepted. And then we also get to see that the way the idea of secular is accepted by the Indian Constitution, that is again a very interesting and very indigenous and innovative way of approaching secularism, where the approach is very, very positive, where we get to see that the approach is very pragmatic also, that we don't believe in secularism the way French practice it, and we don't practice it either the way the British practice it or the Americans practice it. We have our own Indian way of defining secularism. Wherever necessary, the state will intervene, because there could be very inhuman and anti-equality practices that may exist. Practices that affect the idea of justice could be there. So they are to be eliminated. For that, the state will intervene, but the state will not have its own religion. All the religions will be treated equally. So it's a very Indian way. So that's what I'm saying, that I said I'm making this statement very responsibility, that writing of Indian Constitution was the very first experiment in modern times of creating Indian knowledge system, where there were variety of ideas. We engaged with those ideas, but ultimately the document that we created unleashed the Indian ethos of diversity, of multiculturalism, of cultural exchange, of moving away from any kind of monolithic or homogeneous kind of stereotypical identity. So that was an experiment into Indianness. The idea of India, which is not a imaginary construct, It's certainly a very fluid kind of idea, but that was the ethos of this society, of this civilization for centuries. That idea of India we get to see being consolidated, shaped, and defined in such a way that that suits the modern reality of Indian society, where the rights of all the communities are guaranteed. The communities who were deprived of their rights for centuries, they were given special powers to do away with inequality. And at the same time, the cultural diversity is something which was celebrated. So scholars like Yogendra Yadav had actually described this experiment in India as not as a nation state, but as state nation. So that experimenting with Indianness and giving it a more structured legal form is what we get to see happening through our constitution. And my suggestion to you is that whenever you read the constitution, whenever you study the document of constitution, more than focusing just on the legal provisions or the technical part of it, which is important, and of course, when you are studying it for a particular examination, that is likely to be the approach. But in addition to that, there is something which, as future administrators, you have to carry forward, because you would be participating in making of policies and implementing policies. So in that, you also need to remember the spirit of Indian Constitution. And this spirit of Constitution is diversity, is multiculturalism, is assimilation. Not forced assimilation, but through cultural exchanges. So this is the true spirit of Constitution. This is the true spirit of Indianness. And if we read Constitution with this particular idea, the Constitution will speak with you in more interesting ways than it has been speaking with you right now. I close my presentation with this idea, and I would be happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
As the governor is the nominal head of a state, and there are any particular or special reasons why the state legislature do not have any right to remove the governor, especially in case of Tamil Nadu and West Bengal, the governor are working as an agent of a particular party. So there are any particular reasons?
If you look at the immediate context when the Constitution was written, there was always this threat of secessionist tendencies, because partition had just recently taken place, and that impact of that event was so much on the makers of the Constitution that they found it necessary to keep these, what we call today as more centralist kind of tendencies. So governor as a representative of the central government is, that idea was created so that there would be further division of the country. And that was the reason this particular provision was made. Of course, what we get to see that the idea with which this provision was made was in the practice was misused for various different purposes and in various different ways. The governor's office was also used to topple the government and the state. The agency of the governor was used to create obstacles in the functioning of the state governments. And also the state government doesn't really get any power to remove the governor as such. And there's no, what shall I say, but there no flexibility is kept over there. Now that's the negative repercussion of having this provision. But on the positive side, if you look at it, the reason why this provision was created is to keep the country together. That there is no secession that would happen and there is no further partition of the country.
The Constitution is India's moral contract with itself. So what you will say about this?
Who said this?
Actually, I got from some IAS from this book.
Okay, AI. Okay. So why don't you ask AI? No, I'll try to answer this question. But AI comes with good stuff, huh? Okay, moral contract with herself. Yeah. So actually, you can give that as a title to my speech, isn't it? Moral contract with. But I'll look at it in a little different way, that we need to Indian Constitution with something that is called as constitutional morality, which is beyond the legal kind of a structure. Because at times, you know what happens? Legally, we are very sound. But still, we can deviate from the ethos or the idea of the Constitution. What we say is by letter or by spirit. So at times the letter is kept intact. There is no harm done to the letter, but the spirit is missed out. So if it's moral agreement with herself, then that is actually something which needs to be remembered, that what is the morality of it? Like whatever new policy, new amendment or implementation of certain provision is coming up with, what is the morality of it? Are we actually confirming that ethos, or we are just paying lip service and practicing it technically but not substantially?
The maker of the constitution or were educated people. So why they choose democracy over aristocracy? I mean,
Why did they choose?
democracy.
Huh.
The rule of people. They could have choose aristocracy, means the wise will the rule. Wise people will rule the country. Why did they choose democracy?
Okay. I can look at this question in two different ways. First of all, it's not the case that aristocracy was held as a better form of government in the later centuries. So whatever was said more than 2,300 years before, why should that be considered as ideal? Secondly, if you look at the critique of democracy as it comes in the Western tradition, particularly the ancient, the classical tradition, the way it comes from Plato and Aristotle, for instance, it's not about the democracy that we are practicing, or the idea of democracy. I have to say, even if we keep aside the practice of it, but if you look at the normative, theoretical, or the conceptual part of democracy as modern democracy, when he is criticizing democracy, he is talking more about what in our simplistic kind of manner some people have called as mobocracy. That is just a rule of the majority. But the ethos of common good, or ethos that would take care of the common good, is missed out. So rather than that, it could be aristocracy or it could be philosophy. But the very problem with such kind of a system is that how do we decide who's wise? Can there be a consensus about who's wise? can we necessarily say that all the educated people are wise? Because education gives you degree. Wisdom is completely different thing, and which you may find present even in illiterate people. They could be much wiser than a person having very celebrated degrees, isn't it? So what is wisdom? Who is wise? How will you decide that? So for that also you will have to have some kind of a structural mechanism, some kind of a procedure. So in that sense, I think that it becomes impractical. It's because there is no blue plan that is being provided at how to choose a wise person. But you can also look at it in this way, that when we think of masses as having some kind of collective wisdom, and if they don't fail prey to corruption, or if they don't fail prey to other kind of propaganda that goes on, what they choose, they are expected to express their collective wisdom through elections. So one can look at it that way, that actually it's collective wisdom. It could be collective wisdom. Also, I will add to that we have seen in the past that people actually have shown collective wisdom. The way after emergency people voted, they actually showed collective wisdom. So even in democracy, there could be a space to express collective wisdom. Feel free to ask question in any language.
There seems to be a contradiction between actually the societies and what is the spirit of constitution. In Indian society, it has been seen that hero worshipping has been one of the characteristics of Indian society. So even second RC mentions that we are the worshipper of power. So how to reconcile this contradiction and create more stronger spirit of constitution among people?
Yeah. So one thing that we absolutely forgot is that state is not the only entity which has an important role in, I would say, development is not a very correct word, but in the growth in, again, not economic growth, but overall progress, development of the society. We do talk of civil society, but nobody knows what is civil society. It always is a very abstract kind of a idea. But if you look at various kinds of debates that went on right from the 19th century, or even parallel to the Gandhian movement, if you look at the kind of organizations, Gandhian organizations that were built, there was a very conscious effort to work with the society. In fact, J.C. Kumarappa, on whom I have worked, he was a Gandhian economist. And after Gandhi was assassinated, all the Gandhians came together to form one organization called Gandhi Smarak Nidhi. Now, the Gandhi Bhavan here we have at Kothur is the Maharashtra Gandhi Smarak Nidhi, the one that was set up in 1948. So it had its state level branches. So this one is the Maharashtra branch. So when this Gandhi Smarak Nidhi was formed, Kumarappa tried to define what do we mean by Nidhi. And he said that when we have our own state, now it's no longer the British government, it's our own government, the state is with us. So there is no point in generating Nidhi in terms of money. What we need to do is to develop human resources. And he actually appealed to Pandit Nehru, Rajendra Prasad and Rajkumari Amrut Kaur to resign from their respective posts and come join Gandhi Smarak Nidhi to build the society. No, that could be very unrealistic, and because state also has its own significance. But the point that one needs to remember over here is that what is it that was done in past 75 years to internalize the constitutional values in the society. So we may have introduced certain, for instance, that pledges are there on the very first page of our school textbooks. But then when everything is approached through bureaucracy, that becomes some kind of regimentation and routinization of everything, because then it's just a lip service or it's just kind of a compliance. For people to do it voluntarily or to feel that kind of an affinity with certain kind of values, parallelly such attempts need to be done, and also it should get reflected in the lives of the people who claim to be leaders. Now, till the point when we had these kinds of leaders, those values also were, at least to some extent, were respected. Now, if the general values that are believed in nowadays, it's like, for instance, nobody now believes in minimalism or simplicity. It's abundance is everything. Even if you talk about simplicity, like, please yaar, mat pakao, is what people would say. So if that kind of ethos has changed in so many ways, and nobody is there to show those values from their own lives, then that gap is going to get increased. But then it's, I think what we need to do is, there is more kind of inward looking that needs to happen, that everything can't be done by the state's bureaucracy, the political leaders. What is it that the civil society is doing for this? What kind of institutions that are actually they have emerged, or they are to, those who didn't believe in these constitutional values, they in fact worked at the level of society very rigorously, and that is the reason now their values have actually got more acceptance, because they were working for past 77 years. Parallelly, I remember Professor Parshikar had said this after the 2014 elections results in one of the discussions. He said that people believed that the constitutional values will be accepted by people automatically. We don't have any responsibility to spread those ideas or to create some kind of affinity among the people for those ideas. So if you haven't put any labor to make people feel that these ideas are valuable, how will automatically they get accepted? So that's actually the point, I feel, that because such conscious, rigorous, sustained efforts are, again, sustained is a very important thing. Like someday, some fine morning, people feel which should be done, then maybe for 2 weeks there is some gathering somewhere where people decided there will be Samvidhan Abhyas Upakram Rabuya Gawamadhe. The end of second week itself, we find that there are only 2 people who turn up, and the entire idea kind of collapses. So that's actually the problem, that a very sincere and sustained attempt to practice those ideas, spread those ideas, hasn't really happened at the level of society.
If yes, then what about those people who don't know about Constitution?
See, there is some kind of a spirit of the Constitution, which, as I said, is the true spirit of Indianness. And as long as nobody is going to harm that spirit of Indianness consciously, the people generally would not want to move away from India. But if that principle is harmed, and that principle is now being harmed by some people. When, for instance, you say Hindi, Hindu, Hindustan, you are trying to impose a very narrow kind of idea of India. And that may create such thoughts in the minds of certain communities, certain sections. And again, I want to be very, very clear about this when I'm saying communities. Please don't equate community with a religious community. It could be linguistic community. It could be any kind of ethnic community. Because when you impose a certain kind of idea on the people, take very, very simple example. Now, this, when Hindi was being made mandatory here in Maharashtra, how did we feel about it? We are not the people who are so anti-Hindi. We may not be speaking like very good Hindi. Our Hindi could be very Bollywood type of Hindi. We have been speaking Hindi, but then when that kind of imposition is coming, and where we know that the Marathi schools are being closed and Hindi is being forced, there is some kind of restlessness. Now, if such imposition of one particular language happens, how will different states react? We don't know. And I'll give you an example from Pakistan. And these are scholarly articles, remember. I'm not saying what is happening at popular level. First of all, Urdu is not the language of Pakistan. They say that it is the language of certain Muslims of Uttar Pradesh who after partition migrated from Uttar Pradesh to Pakistan. Because the people who were already living in that part, they were either speaking Punjabi, Sindhi, Pashto, Baluchi and couple of other languages. They were not speaking Urdu. And here also, in Maharashtra, in Konkan, the Konkani Musalman would speak Konkani, Marathi Musalman would speak Marathi. There could be some mixture of, like, it's called Dakhani. So it would be Dakhani kind of Marathi they would speak. In Malayalam, in Kerala, you will find the Kerala Muslims speak Malayalam. So even the Christians there would speak Malayalam. The Maharashtrians, the Bible for us, the Christa Purana was written in Marathi. So the local languages, local cultural practices were adopted. You see the Marathi Christians, in their weddings, they use akshada. Now those akshadas are not thrown on the bride and groom inside the church, but when they step out of the church, they have to stand on the steps, and then the entire community then throw akshadas on them. So there is so much of cultural exchange that has happened over here, which is true Indian ethos. And actually that was the true ethos of the Indian subcontinent. But because in Pakistan they accepted one language, Urdu, one religion, Islam, one nation, Pakistan, they had problems in nation building. We didn't have those problems in nation building because we celebrated diversity. But now if we believe that if we just want to replace Urdu with Hindi, Islam with Hindu and Pakistan with Hindustan, and we still believe that we would be a stronger nation, that we are missing out on something.
Last question.
Why the three words secular, socialist, and integrated? Three words were added during that.
Two words.
Two words were added during that period only. During the end of
To highlight the significance of those values which were already there in the Constitution. It's not the case that the Constitution didn't support secularism. Look at all the fundamental rights. They actually propagate the same value. Look at socialism, whether directive principles of state policy or the right against exploitation or right to equality, basically cherish the values of socialism. So that was the time when the need was felt that we need to remind ourselves that we actually have adopted these ideas and we should not deviate from this. This was also the time when the banks were nationalized. not exactly that period, but that entire tenure of Indira Gandhi, if you look at. So basically, those values were the attempt was to remind people of those values. That's where those words which were there in spirit were also included in letters in the preamble, but not in the constitution. I will not say that only in the preamble the words are good. The constitution, they were already there. Thank you.